You are now tuned into the sounds of
Big Nate Sports Talk.
It's on all the time, anytime.
Tuned in to Big Nate Sports Talk, the show that is on all the time, anytime. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the next big thing, the latest up-and-coming sports journalist, your host, Nathan Snell.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony Handy, for the wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is your host, Nathan Snell of Big Nate Sports Talk Podcast. This is episode number 375 of the podcast. And in this episode, we have a very special guest. But before we get into that, there's a few things I want to say up front. Painfully, I have to talk about the Washington Mystics in a separate video. It's been a rough, and I mean rough, 7 games so far to the season. Also, you can follow my content on MarylandSportsBlog.com. We're also getting ready for the New York Liberty that's happening later today. Not looking forward to that game, but I'm confident that it'll be a great day for the Mystics. But let me bring on first Mr. Brenden Potts. Brenden, how you doing, sir?
Dude, I'm doing like fantastic, and the biggest reason is Dallas Mavericks, my favorite team for like 12 years, is going to the finals. So I'm like I've told people I'm on cloud 10. Cloud 9's not high enough for me. But yeah, man, the Seattle Storm are doing good as well. So we're doing good over here.
Must be nice. Must be nice. And ladies and gentlemen, the moment you have been waiting for, please let's welcome Mr. Calvin Wetzel to the stage. Calvin, how you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm good. What's up, guys? It's good to be on with you. I'm looking forward to hanging out and chatting some WNBA, some hoops. I love it.
Thank you. Likewise. Ladies and gentlemen, Calvin Wetzel, freelance writer, also writer for CBS Sports, her hoop stats. Just tell us a little bit more about yourself, Calvin.
Yeah, like you said, I'm freelance. So her hoop stats, CBS Sports, probably the two places you can find me the most. But, you know, anywhere that I'm getting opportunities, I'll write or, you know, podcast or whatever outlet. I have a couple podcasts. One with her hoop stats is called Coast to Coast with Karina Mustafa. We cover women's basketball all year. So WNBA right now, we'll get into college basketball, you know, over the winter. And then also Bet She Wins is my other podcast, just covering all women's sports betting across, you know, and any soccer, softball, volleyball, all that type of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing and what I've been up to. And I just love covering the game and following the game any way I can.
Nice. I'll let you take the floor first, Brenden.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, about your podcast with Karina? Because I absolutely love that you guys are all the like interesting stuff that you guys get into.
Yeah, it's really fun. Karina is a blast to work with. She's great at what she does, so it makes it easy. But we love just talking women's hoops, and we started. It was a little less than a year ago. It was like the second half of WNBA season last year in 2023. So we're probably a couple months away from going on a year on our podcast now. And we just decided that, you know, we both really like loved to talk women's hoops. And at that point, we didn't really have as much of an outlet to do it in this sort of format, like what we're doing right now, chatting. We did some writing and things like that, but we both love podcasting. And so we were both like, hey, let's just start a podcast together. Let's go every week. And we love breaking down like any of the biggest stories, or, you know, what was happening in a specific game, or what games are coming up, what players are doing well, just like whatever's going on in women's basketball. We love to dive into it as much as we can.
Where did your passion for journalism start?
Well, in college, it's funny. I got a funny story about that, because I grew up, you know, people follow me know that I love the stats and the numbers and the analytics side of thing. And I grew up like a big math guy. So I would get like A's in math and C's and everything else, you know? And so I hated writing. Writing was like the opposite of math. And so I, like, anytime I had to write an essay in school, you know, high school, college, whatever, writing papers, I was like, I'm going to avoid that as much as possible. And then in college, it was like the end of my sophomore year. One of my really, really good friends was the sports editor at the student newspaper, and the assistant sports editor was graduating. So he like, hey, do you want to next year, junior year, do you want to be my assistant sports editor? And I was like, no, absolutely not. I hate writing. I'm not going to do it. You can't convince me otherwise. He kept asking me. He kept bugging me. I kept saying no. This was the end of the school year. And then we got into like the summer between sophomore and junior year. I must have told him no like 15 times. And he called me and he was like, man, like I really need someone. And somehow he twisted my arm and finally got me to change my mind. I don't know how, but I'm so grateful that he did, because what I realized is that I actually do enjoy writing when it's about something I'm passionate about, like basketball. So the only reason I thought I didn't like writing is because I wasn't writing about stuff I love. So I fell in love with it, started writing for this school newspaper, and then I started doing some broadcasting for the school radio station for women's basketball, soccer, all sorts of different sports, and just like being in the studio during halftime, like all that type of stuff. So really dove into all the different forms of journalism, writing, broadcasting. But then I still ended up kind of just going into math. I started teaching math outside of college, or after college. And then a few years went by and I started to get the writing itch again, like the journalism itch. And so I saw a post on Twitter from Her Hoop Stats saying like, hey, we're looking for some help for some people to come on our team and do some different things. So I reached out, and that's where I really started to get into this side of things that I'm doing now, postgraduate.
Brenden,
Did I tell you that I got my job through the lead from Twitter? Because that's exactly like I reached out to the lead looking for some practicum hours. I'd say the summer of, or I'm sorry, the during my junior year, and I reached out to them, and I had no idea how to do writing like this, and they like taught me how to do it and got me into writing. So that, I mean, your story is kind of similar to mine. But who are the people that you kind of looked up to in like in the journalism world, or now that you kind of like got into journalism, who are those people that you kind of look up to?
Yeah, well, I mean, it would probably start with my buddy who I mentioned, because he taught me so much in college. His name's Judah Newby, so shout out to Judah. He was one of those people who like knew exactly what he wanted to do from when he was a little kid. So he would be like 3-4 years old in his driveway, like his siblings are playing basketball, whatever, and he's like announcing the driveway games. You know, like he knew he wanted to be a radio broadcaster, and that's what he's doing now. He's a sports radio guy in Portland sports talk radio. So he was all in that world for his whole life, you know. And so he taught me so much about journalism and broadcasting and things like that in college when I was working for the student newspaper and the student radio station with him. And then once I really started to get into it, I think I just started to find some good writers, you know, like past college, these last several years in the WNBA, just people whose writing I really enjoy reading, and try to sort of emulate that. So I think like Katie Barnes at ESPN is someone who I really enjoy reading and is an excellent writer. M.A. Vopel is another one. Some of my friends now, like Miles Ehrlich and Owen Pence, do some great writing. just a lot of different people who I think set the bar really high in the space and do really good work that I look up to and try to try to learn from them as much as possible.
What is some advice you can give to aspiring journalists like myself and Brenden?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say like just try as much stuff as possible. Like for me, when I first started, when I saw that tweet from Her Hoop Stats, that was 2019. So I guess a little over 5 years ago now. And like I said, in college, I did lots of different stuff, writing, hosting in studio, broadcasting live games. And so with Her Hoop Stats, like I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I just knew I kind of wanted to be involved in the space in some form. So I've tried so many different things, since I started from writing like an analytical articles to more of like feature stories, all sorts of different writing to obviously like podcasting, like I mentioned, to sort of more of the like video breakdowns type of stuff for social media, getting into film, just like so many different things, trying it out and seeing like, am I good at this or not? Do I enjoy this or not? Is there like a market where people enjoy consuming this or not? And like sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes it's no. Sometimes I try stuff and it didn't really work very well. Or I figured out like I'm not that good at this, or this isn't something that's that like interesting to people. So it's like, all right, I tried it. I'll move on. I'll try something else. And I think podcasting is honestly like the thing that I've tried that has kind of stuck the most, which is why I have 2 podcasts now and love doing podcasts like this as a guest. It's just, I think, probably my sweet spot where I found like really my lane. But I mean, I still enjoy all that other stuff too. But like that's taken me like 4 to 5 years, like I said, to try all these different things and throw stuff at the wall, as they say, see what sticks. So my biggest advice would just be to like, don't limit yourself. Don't box yourself in, not right away, at least. Like try as much stuff as you can, figure out where your lane is. And eventually you'll find your lane and find where you're the most comfortable and where your strengths are. And then really just lean into that.
I like that. We're going to transition into week 3 of the WNBA. And just what are your overall thoughts so far as we're going into 3 weeks of the season?
It's been incredible. Like there's been so many good games and we knew there would be. And I think it's been so interesting to see like who's played well and who struggled. And so many people thought like the Fever and Caitlin Clark would come out and be good right away. And when I say so many people, I mean like so many newer fans, I think, and a lot of the fans who've been around for a while kind of knew that rookies, especially rookie guards, don't just come in and win the MVP right away. So we've been seeing, the Fever have 1 win. They've struggled. I think you mentioned in your intro, the Mystics have struggled, and obviously having Brittany Sykes hasn't helped. The Sun have looked great. The Lynx have looked great. The Aces have looked good, but a little bit vulnerable. They lost a game, and obviously they don't have Chelsea Gray, so maybe not quite as dominant so far without her as they were last year. The Liberty looked good for the first week and then dropped a couple games. So it feels like anybody can beat anybody. And there's just so much unpredictability in this league, which has been really, really fun. And there's so many cool stories too. I think, especially when you look at players who maybe weren't in the league for whatever reason, or weren't as good before, either most improved or comeback player is going to be an incredible race this year, because you talk about like what Dearica Hamby is doing, outstanding with LA. And you look at some of the players like Diamond DeShields, Kennedy Carter for the Sky, Tina Charles for the Dream, who wasn't in the league last year, Skylar Diggins-Smith, who obviously was pregnant and had a year off. And I know Brenden, as a Storm fan, you're all familiar with that story. And even Brianna Jones, who got hurt maybe a month into the season last year, missed the rest of the season, and now is back playing well for the Sun. There are so many players who I think weren't in the league last year, or at least weren't in the league for very long and got hurt, who now are playing at a really, really high level this year. And I think that's been really cool to see.
Brenden?
Yeah. I'm glad that I was waiting for you to get the Storm in, but I feel like the Storm right now they got the first look at the Lynx, which when we played the Lynx the first couple of times, I said I knew how good the Storm were going to be, or how good their roster looked, and I saw those 2 games against the Lynx, and I'm like, okay, this Lynx team isn't going to be some pushover. It wasn't going to be like it was last year. It's going to be, they're going to be much better. Nafisha Collier, I had said on here, is a dark horse MVP candidate with how she's playing so far. But I want to put my stake down on this take, because we haven't talked about it at all. Me and Nate haven't at all. I'm putting down that Ezzy McGregor is going to win Defensive Player of the Year this year. Like, this is the year.
All right.
This needs to be the year, and it should have been 2 years ago. Like, last year, I get it. Like, we didn't have the record that we could have had to win all these awards. Otherwise, I think Jewel would have won MVP. But I mean, like, 2 years ago, she should have won Defensive Player of the Year, and she gets like 2 or 3 more blocks in a string of like 2 or 3 games. She wins the award. So I feel like this is the year. She's already going on a hot streak defensively. She got, I believe, 5 stocks yesterday, which is steals and blocks combined. So she's already in mid-level form, or mid-season form, through the first 3 weeks of the season. My question for you would be, like, who have been the most surprising teams for you and the most disappointing teams this season?
Yeah, well, first off, to your point about Ezzy, she's basically averaging 5 stocks, 4.9. She's averaging 3 blocks a game, and I just had to pull up some stats here because I love Ezzy McGregor. I'm a huge fan of her since she came into the league. I always love players who are really long and athletic and make a big defensive impact like that, but also can, even if not like elite offensively, can at least contribute offensively, and can run the floor, can hit shots when they're open. And obviously, like, Ezzy isn't going to bring you the same offense as like Jewel Lloyd or Skylar or something like that on that team, but she's not hurting you on offense. And she, like you said, is elite on defense. So I was pulling up some stats here. Last time anyone averaged 3 blocks a game, which is what Ezzy is averaging right now, was Brittany Griner in 2016. And Brittany Griner did it a few years in a row there. Before BG, you got to go back to Lisa Leslie. So the numbers that Ezzy is putting up right now are historic and very rare in this league. So I just wanted to say that I really like that take on your part. But to your question, who's been the most surprising either way? Honestly, I would say that the Sun have been surprising, and I don't want to say that I didn't think they'd be good, because obviously Steph White, Coach of the Year last year. The Sun have been good forever. AT, one of the best players in the league, but I didn't see them being 6-0 at this point in the season. And I didn't necessarily know that this backcourt, after they lost their starting backcourt over the offseason, and had to replace them with 2 young faces, obviously, that had been coming off the bench, and Ty Harris and Dejanay Carrington, that they would be playing as well as they are. But they have both stepped up big time for the Sun. And we knew what we were going to get from the Sun front court, especially with Brown and Jones back, and then, of course, AT and Bonner. But the backcourt, I think, had some question marks, and they've really answered those question marks in a big way. So the Sun have been a pleasant surprise to me. And then a surprise on the other end, I would say the Mystics, although, Brittany Sykes being her, I mean, that's a big part of it. And obviously Shakira Austin, they're still sort of like managing her lingering injury. And I know, Nate, you brought them up at the beginning of the show. I mean, the reason I have them in my surprise category is because I didn't think they would be 0-7. I didn't think that the Mystics were going to come out here and win a championship, but I thought they'd be a little bit better than this. Even with some of these injuries, I would have thought they would have a win by now. I was expecting Ariel Atkins to really have a huge bounce back year, and I think she kind of has in every other game. She's kind of on this weird pattern where she's inconsistently shown some big flashes of being able to carry this team when some of those players are out, and they lost some of those players over the offseason, like Natasha Cloud, Elena Deladon, and of course without Sykes and sometimes Shakira. Like, you expect Atkins to step up, and she has sometimes, and then she's had a few games where she hasn't really shown up either, only put in 2-4 points, whatever. So I was expecting a little bit more consistency out of her. And it's still early. It's been 3 weeks. Hopefully we can still get that. The Mystics are not going to be winless for that much longer. At some point, they're going to get somebody. They're going to pick up a win. It's only a matter of time. But I think both ends of the standings have been a little bit surprising to me in that I didn't really see either of those teams having a 0 in the win or the loss column this deep. We're heading into June now, so this deep into the season.
Can I do a follow up on Connecticut? Like, I've seen so many people on X say, like, look at Connecticut's record and say, oh, they haven't played a real team. And I wanted to ask, like, if one of those people was in this conversation right now with us, like, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say I think they played the Lynx, who are playing great, and they beat the Lynx, so that's a real team right there. Second off, they played the Mercury, who shot absolutely terrible and didn't look like a good team in that game. They had one of the worst 3-point shooting percentages in a game in league history, the worst for anyone that was a non-zero percentage that made at least 1 3. But outside of that, the Mercury have looked pretty good. The Mercury beat the Aces, right? Shooting the ball the opposite way in that game. So obviously the Mercury have shown some flashes of being a really good team, even without BG so far, when their shots are going in. And Nate Tibbetts is running a great offense there, a really modern offense in his first year. So I think the Sun have played a couple of real teams. They've also obviously picked up some wins against, their first 3 games. Fever, Mystics, Fever, that's the bottom of the standings, but they looked really good in those games too. It's not like they squeaked out. They beat the Fever by 21 and held Caitlin Clark down in her first game in the WNBA, obviously with 10 turnovers. So the Sun have been playing really well. There's a couple games that were close that maybe they could be 5-1 right now instead of 6-0, like that Lynx game. They got out of there by 1, but they also got a road win against the Sky, which the Sky is another team I should put into my surprising category. I think the Sky are playing a lot better than I thought. You have to give Teresa Weatherspoon a lot of credit for that. They're 500 right now. They're 3-3. And I thought this team was destined to be either 11th or 12th in the league. I thought this team was a surefire lottery team with, last year they barely squeaked into the playoffs, and then you lose Kalia Copper, your best player, to the Mercury. But what Teaspoon has done there has been great to even have them in the conversation as like an average team at all, or in the conversation as potentially sneaking into the playoffs again. They're 8th in the standings right now, which is where they were last year. I think she's done a great job in her first year, so I've been surprised by them as well. But that was a good win for the Sun on the road. In the Sky home debut, Angel Reese's home debut, the place was lit. It was sold out. The crowd was rocking, and the Sun had to go in there. And of course, AT gets ejected, obviously, so they have to finish out that win without her. So the Sun, I definitely wouldn't say that the Sun, to answer your question, have just kind of, coasted by easy wins or whatever. I think they've been really impressive.
A couple of things I wanted to add on. I think Brendan's crazy for saying Ezzy Magna-Magor is going to be defensive player of the year. I'm just messing with you, Brendan. No, I can see that most definitely. I have to put Dallas in there. With not having Satu most likely until August, and then Natasha Howard's out for the next 3 to 6 weeks. Bringing in Mo Billings, I thought was definitely a big pickup for them, because she's definitely proven Atlanta and LA wrong that they should have kept her on the roster. I think Seattle is starting to kind of pick it up in terms of chemistry wise. Washington, in my opinion, Ariel Atkins, I'm a huge fan of hers. But the one thing I've noticed, it goes back to the championship year. She plays better when there's a star in the lineup. When you don't have Natasha there, you don't have Elena there. Now, there's more eyes on her. Now Brittany Sykes not there due to injury, now the ball is now more in her hands. Now you're not only expecting her to be a dictator of the ball, but you're also asking her to take on more now of a scoring role as well, which is doable. But the lineups you have out there at times, like for example, in the loss to Atlanta, the first and third quarters, they did well. In the second and third quarter, particularly in the fourth, for 9 minutes, I really wanted to break my TV because they really couldn't buy a basket. So I'm confident. I think it's going to come together today. I don't trust New York. I'm just really disappointed just really with some of the teams from the offseason. I don't think New York was probably my biggest disappointment because they did not really address their defense. That was the biggest thing I think they needed to work on was defense. I think outside of Naira Sabli, maybe Kayla Thornton, there's still some roles that are not truly defined with the Liberty. I think it's time to put Courtney Vandersloot on the bench to me because she is a defensive liability. And then as far with Jonquel Jones is a good example of this. I don't know, and I seen this even when Beck she was in Connecticut. This you call one foul on her, throw the whole thing away. She just shuts down. I don't know where that I don't know where that comes from. So I would say New York's probably my most disappointing team. Connecticut, I'm not surprised how they've come out and looked. They probably have the most experience on that roster. I would have thought Atlanta would have taken that step forward. I still think there's some roles that still need to be defined, like Letitia here. She's only played 34 seconds so far. There's a lot of depth that Tanisha Wright has at her disposal. She's not using it. So I would say Atlanta's been my most disappointing. New York, and then Connecticut, I'm not surprised, and Seattle.
Yeah, to your point about New York, I mean that is definitely one of the things that they're going to have to overcome is both the perimeter defense because you can put Benijah Laney on one player, and then any other perimeter scorer is going to have a pretty easy time in that game. So that's why they struggle against the Aces and what we saw in the finals. Like when you play a team like the Aces that has 2 or 3 good perimeter scorers, Benijah Laney can guard one of them, and that's it. And then, like you said about Jonquel Jones, there are days where she looks like an absolute beast, like the MVP that she was with Connecticut in 2021. But those are the days where she doesn't pick up an early foul. When she picks up that early foul, you know how the game's going to go. So that's another thing that New York has to kind of figure out if they want to get over that hump, because we know that their ceiling is incredibly high. If that shot from Courtney Vandersloot goes in last year, they're 40 minutes away from a championship in Game 5. Not saying they would have gone into Las Vegas and won that, but they're obviously close. But there's some holes too that they got to overcome if they want to get over that hump. So the thing is that when you see Chelsea Gray out for a while and Las Vegas loses early to the Mercury and New York's looking good, and my first thought is maybe New York can somehow steal that 1 seed and get Game 5 of the finals at home if they can get that far, just because, if the Aces drop another 2 or 3 while Chelsea Gray is out, even if the Aces pick it up and look dominant again down the stretch, if they took a few extra losses, maybe, New York is able to beat them out in terms of win-loss record. And then all of a sudden New York drops 2 in a row. And now thinking, well, I don't know about that 1 seed, which would be really important. So that's the tough thing with New York. I think they do have some questions to answer. But obviously, it's a really good team that can win a championship. They're just gonna have to kind of address some of that stuff or make up for it in other areas.
Go ahead, Brenden.
So I do have a question about Indiana, but I first wanted to get to some breaking news really quick while we're recording out of Seattle. They have released Dulce Fagna Mengiadu. They just cut her, and I'm surprised because like a player getting cut in the middle of the season is always surprising. You always wonder why that happened, but with Dulce specifically, I can see there's a lot of potential in her. She just hasn't been able to get it out, and I feel like that's why she hasn't gotten enough PT through 1 year and 3 weeks. But there just has been opportunity for her to grow as a player. It just hasn't worked out in Seattle. So that's a big glaring reason why I can see that they moved on. So I wanted to speak about Indiana though. Like they're up to a disappointing start based off the hype that they got this offseason with Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston going into her second year. what needs to change in your opinion, and is one of those things that needs to change Christy Sides? Do they need to go in a different direction?
I think probably, it's a little bit early to say for sure that you put a definitive answer on that, but so far from what I've seen, I'm not very convinced that if this young, talented core is ever going to win a championship, that they're going to do it under Christy Sides. I think that she hasn't exactly been dealt an easy hand for sure, both in terms of the wildly unrealistic expectations that everyone put on this team, with all of the youth, obviously the crazy schedule they've faced. They're coming up on their 10th game, which is a quarter of the way through the season already. They've been playing every other day, back-to-backs, traveling. There's just a lot that she's been asked, but even with that hand that she's been dealt, which has been really tough, I don't think she has lived up to even what more maybe realistic expectations would have been. And obviously, that anyone who was coming in saying, "Oh, the Fever are going to win the championship, the Fever are going to gel right away," all of that, and if she ends up going 500, and those people are disappointed, well, you just had unrealistic expectations. But 1-8, even for all of that, I think is a little bit disappointing, especially when you look at some of the different players. Like Aaliyah Boston is playing better now, but it feels like she was having a tough time putting Aaliyah Boston in positions to where she was able to really display her talent, especially early on in the season. And then Melissa Smith, maybe more later, until that last game against the Storm last night, when she was back in the starting lineup because Temi Fagbenley was hurt. And Temi obviously is a success story. If you want to look somewhere to point to a success story before her injury, that's definitely one that you can look at. But I think just in terms of what needs to change, aside from that, they got to start playing some defense. The Fever, you have a defensive star in Aaliyah Boston, obviously. And before Temi was hurt, she was playing really well on defense as well. They put Christy Wallace into the lineup to hopefully give a little more perimeter defense. We know that Caitlin Clark is never going to be a defensive player of the year, but you'd like to see her develop a little bit more on that end. I think when you're a guard that has that size, hopefully, you should be able to at least, and again, she's a rookie, so it's going to take time, but to develop to the point where you can be a capable defender, just in terms of being able to switch on some of the bigger wings. And I don't think she's there yet in, the first month of her WNBA career, which is fine. But the Fever really have struggled a lot on the defensive end. They gave up 103 to the Storm, as you know, Brenden. They gave up 99 to the Aces, and I get it. Those are two really good offenses. But this team is allowing a lot of points. They gave up 102 to the Liberty in their second game, 91 to the Liberty in the next game, 92 to the Sun. There's just, you're not going to win a lot of games like that, even on nights when Caitlin is really clicking and hitting deep logo bombs and scoring 30 like we saw the other day. That you're still not going to win games when your good defensive days are holding teams to 85 and your bad defensive days are giving up 100. So I think that's where it's got to start for them. And then they just got to develop some chemistry on the offensive end. I think the pick and roll with, Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston hasn't looked like the juggernaut that maybe a lot of people thought it would right away. And that's going to take some time. I know Aaliyah Boston didn't play in a system like that in college. So you're going to have to sort of develop that and figure that out. And then obviously when you have shooters and scorers, like Kelsey Mitchell around her, that gives you a lot of weapons, but they haven't really felt like they clicked yet in terms of that chemistry between all those different players and figuring out kind of how they want to play off of each other. So that's something that they're going to have to figure out as well. And at this point, I don't think this is the year where it's going to all come together. I don't think they're going to magically, you could clip this and roast me if I'm wrong. I don't think they're going to magically flip a switch by the end of this season and turn into any type of contender. At best, they somehow sneak into the 8 seed, but I don't even see that happening, which is a scary thought for the future. If you think about the Fever potentially not making the playoffs and getting another lottery pick, and you look at players who are coming out like Paige Beckers, Kiki Iriafen, if they can somehow get one of those players as well, add the talent, And who knows, maybe it's a new coach after Christie sides if they do move on from her, or someone who knows how to take all that young talent and mold it together. And now you're basically going to have 4 lottery picks in Nalissa, AB, Caitlin, and whoever that is. This is all hypothetical, but if that happens, that is a scary prospect for the league going on 2025, 2026, especially when those players are going to be on rookie contracts when that new CBA hits. So they might have some room to go at a free agent as well. Who knows? I'm speculating best case scenario for them in the future, but I definitely think they could have a lot of reason for optimism going forward. But this year, I'm really not seeing it.
This is I'm curious to get your thoughts on just how I'm really big on head coach and GM are two separate entities in basketball, and obviously Lynn Dunn, former head coach, now GM for the Fever, has been at this for a couple years now. This is more not directed at her, but in general, when do we start kind of holding front office accountable for what's being drafted, free agency, and because Indiana right now through the short time, the quarter of the season we played, I don't know what their identity is, offense they're running it through, who they're running through, the offense is running through, like how much responsibility should be on front office.
Yeah, well, in general, I mean, it kind of depends on where you see the problem, and I think like you can look at Chicago before Teaspoon got there and say obviously James Wade was both, but I think we can all agree that James Wade was a great basketball coach, but some of those moves he made right before he left Chicago were maybe questionable, trading away some of their picks, obviously, especially in some loaded draft classes that they had to go make some trades, like trade away Kalia Copper to get one of those picks back. So when you're making moves like that, I think you can point to the front office and say like, this, why did you make this move? In Indiana's case, it's hard for me to really look at the front office and pinpoint any major moves that they've done wrong so far. You could have said maybe there's some minor stuff, but drafting Caitlin Clark wasn't a mistake. Caitlin Clark hasn't been obviously like necessarily what we thought that she could be, but it's only a month in her season, and she's definitely shown some good flashes already. We know that she's going to be a superstar at some point. Drafting Aaliyah Boston, I don't think it was a mistake with the number 1 pick the year before. I think that was still the correct pick. I don't think you go back and look at the draft and think that you should have taken anyone different. Drafting Alyssa Smith, you could make an argument that they should have drafted Shakira Austin, but everyone thought that Ryan Howard and Alyssa Smith were the top 2. Everyone other than maybe Mike Tebow. That was a brilliant move on his part, making that trade, obviously. And Shakira Austin has been awesome, but I would not fault them for drafting Alyssa Smith at all with the number 2 pick in that draft. So, yeah, draft-wise, I don't really see necessarily anything that I would point at and say, like, this was a huge mistake or anything like that. I still think Grace Berger has a lot of potential when you go deeper in the first round. So I don't necessarily think that we can say that was a mistake yet either. Like maybe a couple years from now we can look back on that and I'll be wrong, but right now I'm still fine with that draft pick. I do like Grace Berger a lot. I think to me it's more coaching than front office if you had to point one way or the other with this team, because I think coaching has been given a lot of talent, and even though that talent is young and hasn't played together a lot and has had a tough schedule, not a lot of practice time, not a lot of time to develop, it still feels like they could be doing a little bit more to put that talent together with his coaching staff. So if I had to go one way or the other, I'd probably go coaching staff in this specific case. But eventually, if this team never pans out a year or two down the road to what we think they can be when you give them some time and develop that talent, then maybe you can start looking to the front office and thinking about stuff that they could have done differently. But I'm not ready to go to that point yet.
I agree with that, Brenden.
Yeah, and whether it's the WNBA or I've also seen this in the NBA as well. I've never really been a fan of head coaches being the GMs. You see it a lot you see it a lot more in the WNBA than the NBA, although I've seen it in the NBA as well. Shout out to Derek Fisher. But it's it. There are some coaches that are really good GMs, and they've obviously had success. But you see the kind of movement that the WNBA is having with having two separate people do the GM job and then the head coach. Um, but for I want to transition back to Seattle. Um, what we talked about, like they're having some chemistry issues, and I think they're starting to get into the groove of it now with notching a couple of wins in their last few games. For you, what's the ceiling for them once they kind of get it all together by the end of the season?
The ceiling, I think, is a championship. I think that if everything goes right and falls into place for them, they got a shot. I wouldn't put them as the favorites or anything, but they do have a shot. And like you said, the chemistry, maybe wasn't there right away in that first week and those first couple games against the Lynx. But the difference between a team like Seattle and a team like Indiana, who both obviously had some new pieces and some chemistry issues to sort out, is that Seattle is loaded with veterans. These players have all been around the block. Jewel Lloyd, Skylar Diggins-Smith, Neko Gwumke. Obviously some of the pieces on the bench are younger, but even in that regard, you have like Sammy Whitcomb, who's a veteran. Ezzy, I wouldn't put her in that same category, but even Ezzy has been around for 5 years now. So you're talking about a lot of players who played a lot of basketball with a lot of different people in this league. And anytime that you put a bunch of new players together who haven't played together, and especially in the WNBA where you don't have very long training camps, some of these players are doing different things over the off season. You're really kind of thrown into the fire in terms of working out that chemistry. Like, it's going to take a little bit of time, but Seattle, because they have a good coach, in my opinion, Noah Quinn, and so many veteran pieces, it didn't take them very long. It took them a week, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks to sort of iron out some of that stuff and start clicking. We've seen them click pretty well these last few games, granted against like the Mystics and the Fever, but yeah, they've been dominating these games against those teams. Whereas the Fever, the chemistry issues, it's going to take a lot longer than just a week or two because a lot of these players are still 22, 23. They're still learning professional basketball. So that's the difference of Seattle, and Seattle is going to continue to just get better and better and better as the season goes on, I think. And we haven't seen them at their best yet. I think by the time we get to June, July, they're going to look even better than they do now, which is already a lot better than they did a week or two ago. So it's scary to think of what they can be if they're firing on all cylinders. And I think they have a real shot to win a championship. But they also are playing in an era of super teams where you have teams like New York and Las Vegas, especially if Chelsea Gray comes back full strike to deal with. So it's going to be tough for sure.
Yeah, and I'll also add in that that it's gonna come down to Jewel Lloyd does not have to be the best player on the team night in and night, like every night, like she did last year. Like last year, the only two options were Jewel Lloyd and Ezzy McLaughlin, and like you said earlier, like Ezzy's not as strong of an option on offense. She's more on the defensive side, and I agree with that. But now with the offensive presence like NECA in the post, it's a real luxury to have. And Skylar Diggins-Smith, I can't say enough good things about Skylar. I love having her on this team. I know the team loves having her. And what I've seen from the team towards Skylar is they immediately have her back. We all know the situation that happened in Phoenix and kind of how that went down. And when they played Phoenix in the preseason, the team immediately had her back, and it's just so nice to see, and so nice to see that this team is together, because it really raises the ceiling.
Yeah, definitely. And when you look at, I mean, what game was it where I'm sure this is a family friendly podcast, but I can't remember the deal. Someone at the end of the game, like they didn't shake hands or something, and they were all saying like, "Yeah, we got Skylar's effing back" or something like that. I can't
That
remember
was
exactly
Phoenix.
what it was. That
That
was
was
Phoenix.
Phoenix
You know
in
what I'm talking
preseason.
about, right?
Yep, yep,
And yeah, that speaks to
yep.
exactly what you were talking about. Like they were like, "Yeah, Skylar, like she's ours now. Like we're riding with her." So you can tell right away that even if it took them a week or two to kind of figure out the on court chemistry stuff, like they're obviously really loving playing together, and they all are like really riding for each other, and just off the court seem to be gelling pretty well, which is great. So this team that just raises this team's ceiling a lot, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to transition. The big elephant in the room is obviously with the new fans that have transitioned from college now into the pros. And we've seen the last going on 3 weeks, even before the season. You've had people within the media, go using their platform saying that there's this quote unquote hate on Caitlin Clark, which there's not been. Then obviously now players now deactivating their social medias, disabling comments, not just Caitlin Clark fans, but Angel Reese fans. But now even with journalists, like how do you how do you deal with these new fans? I mean, it's great that we have eyes on the W, but my concern is I think we're starting to cross some lines when we start harassing players, making misogynistic, racial comments. Just from a media's perspective, how much do you put on the media? How much money you put on the media? And then I guess for young guys like myself and Brenden, like just how do you stay away from that?
To be honest, for me, and it's tough because Twitter can be such a great place for meeting people and connecting. I mean, that's where I connected with both of you. Obviously, it's a great place for sharing your work and your content. But it also can be a toxic place with some of these people who, like you said, are harassing people and just saying terrible things on there. So it's really a tough balance that I've been trying to figure out. And to be honest with you, I've definitely been on Twitter less than I used to because sometimes I just get sick of scrolling and seeing everything's either like a bot or like some extremely, extremely disrespectful, like human being crossing the line, and it's just like it's exhausting. So there's times when like I log into Twitter, check my DMs, check my notifications, but don't even like scroll anybody's tweets, because I'm like I don't even want to see any of this. But I also miss stuff. I miss news. I miss highlights, stuff like that. So it's definitely a trade off, and I'm trying to figure out that balance on the fly now because there are like so many pros and cons to it, and I don't know if I've really nailed down the most healthy balance on that yet. Still working on that, but I do think like there's a lot of blame all around because like the media covers Caitlin Clark in a way that sort of fosters this to some extent because you see so many different lines that about an article or a podcast or something that has nothing to do with Caitlin Clark, but they shoehorn her in there. They're trying to get those clicks, right? Like, here's who we think is going to be the MVP and why it's not Caitlin Clark. And like you could have just wrote about Asia Wilson being MVP, but had to get Caitlin Clark in the headline. And so I think a lot of that sort of plays into this. But then there's also just these new fans who, like you said, like a lot of people will be like, well, we wanted to treat, you asked for WNBA or women's sports to be treated like men's sports, and this is how men's sports is. But maybe we should stop and think about like, is this how men's sports should be? Like, there's a lot of toxicity in men's sports, but maybe we should pump the brakes on that too. Maybe people shouldn't be harassing NBA players either. Maybe it needs to look. We have an opportunity to kind of set a new standard and be different here in the WNBA, but it's tough because obviously it is such a good thing that we have so many more eyes on this, and all the ratings are going to bring in revenue for this league, especially with a new TV deal coming up, which is going to help tremendously. Obviously, getting charter flights was a big deal. So there's so many positives coming out of this for the league and for the players. But there's also so many tough aspects of it too, with just the harassment and the negativity and just people being uninformed, which is probably not nearly as bad as the harassment, but people coming in and thinking like, oh, Caitlin's going to win the MVP, like, and just kind of authoritatively putting out these takes that are so far off of reality because they haven't followed the league and don't know about any of the other teams or players other than Caitlin Clark. So I would love to see new fan. And I saw this tweet the other day, and I can't remember exactly what it was or who it was, but it was someone. It was when Kate Martin. So it was when the Aces announced their practice, or what was it, like their training camp roster, and there was some. It must have been an Iowa fan in the comments saying like, "So does that mean Kate Martin is on the team? She made the team. Like, can someone explain this to me? Is she safe now?" And I loved that because like that's a new fan who doesn't really know how this works. They don't know that being on the training camp roster doesn't mean that you necessarily made the team yet. And they're admitting, they're like, "Hey, I don't know. Like, can someone who's been around for longer tell me what's up? Because I don't know what's up." Instead of trying to like act like they, have been here for a decade and know exactly how this league works and everything in it, they're open to like, "Hey, I want to learn about it. I have so much to learn. Can you explain this to me?" And I would love to see new fans come in with that mindset because there's always something to learn. And I think even for me, as I've been a fan for 5 years, there's still so much that like I have to learn about the history of this league in terms of like all of the names like Maya Moore and go back down the list. We mentioned Lisa Leslie earlier. Like I wasn't around watching those players as much. So I try to like stay open-minded with when we're talking about like the history of the game. And I think that's really important for new fans just to be open-minded to learning and growing in your like knowledge of the game as you go, and realizing that there's a lot that you probably don't know when you first come into the league as a fan.
Yeah, that's kind of the same thing with me. As I became a fan in 2020, and I didn't know much about the Storm, and so I learned whatever I could to like better my knowledge as a fan, and make it easier for me to root for the team in terms of like being more informed. But I definitely feel like I see a lot of crap on Twitter. For me, it's more the college side because it's more. I feel like it's more personal to me since I know a lot of people who entered the transfer portal. So it's for me, if I ever see if I ever find that I'm taking something personally, even if it doesn't affect me, affect or like impact me personally, I just block them, and my block list is very very long. But yeah, what do you? My question would be to transition. My question would be like, what do you most look forward to this week as we get another week into the WNBA season, and who do you kind of see, or who do you want to see like take that next step as we get closer to the mid season?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Sky Fever. I don't know when this is coming out, if that game will have happened by not. It's on Saturday, but I'm really looking forward to that one. They keep hyping it up, as Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark, and it's so much more than that. But it's also Camila Cardoso, I believe, making her WNBA debut, which is going to be really cool to see. And then I'm just looking forward to another one actually. The Aces signed Tip Hayes today, which is really big for them. So I'm looking forward to seeing her back on the basketball court and seeing how. I mean, that's scary for everyone else who's trying to catch the Aces, but seeing how she integrates into that team. And honestly, like I look forward to every week, no matter what's going on, because I just love watching basketball. So I'm just looking forward to parking myself on my couch and watching some hoops, to be honest with you. Like that's just my favorite thing to do. And the WNBA gives us so many opportunities to do that. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
I just have one more for you. It's actually a two-parter. Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier announced their league that starts in January of next year. What's your thoughts on that? And then my second question to that is, we're in an Olympic year. So obviously the way the schedule is condensed, how are you feeling about the Olympic roster? Yeah, an idea of what it will look like.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think with the Olympic roster, I was thinking about this when you were talking about Ariel Atkins earlier, how she sometimes struggles when she's asked to be the bona fide alpha, but when she's a complementary piece, she's fantastic, and we saw that on the championship team. And I think we've seen that with Team USA. Uh, is that that's why Ariel Atkins can work well on Team USA is because she's playing with so many other stars. So I'd love to see her on the roster. I know Kayla Clark's got a shot, so I think Brianna Stewart was the last one to do that, come out of college and go right into the Olympics. But in terms of that other league, with Stewie and Nafisa, I'm very, very intrigued by the concept of full court 3-on-3 because we've recently seen going back to the Olympics, how the Olympics has added half court 3-on-3 as a separate event from 5-on-5 basketball, which is really fun. It's fast paced. It's exciting. The USA won gold in the last Olympics with like Kelsey Plum, Alicia Gray, but this new league is 3-on-3 full court. I'm reading, but a shorter court, so shorter than a regular basketball court, but they are still going up and down with two hoops, which I don't think I've really ever seen that before. I think probably when I was young, I did that a few times with friends, just because like you got to be really in shape to do that. When I was in high school, and had a limited energy, I would be gassed a minute in if I tried to do that these days. But it's going to be fun to watch. I think it's going to be really entertaining product, and the fact that they're able to pay the high average salary of any women's sport, any women's league in any sport in the country, I think is really cool. So it's going to give us more basketball to watch over the WNBA offseason. I'm never going to complain about more basketball, and especially with all the different unique twists to it. So I'm really excited about that.
Most definitely. I'm just a little concerned. It said the top 30 players. So I feel bad for those if you're not in the top 40 or top 50. I'm a little disappointed with that, but I'm hoping that it'll expand as it progresses. And then I would like to see it kind of those same investors invest into the W, but we'll see. So.
Yeah, definitely. That is a good point.
Yep. Do you have any projects upcoming that fans should be made aware of?
Just maybe tune into both those podcasts. Coast to Coast is every Tuesday. We record Monday nights, which is usually an off day for the WNBA, and put it out Tuesday mornings. So this coming Tuesday, we'll have the next episode of Coast to Coast with Karina Mustafa. We'll be breaking down everything that happened this week in the WNBA. Look forward to next week. So yeah, tune into that, Her Hoop Stats Podcast Network. And then right after I hop off here with you, which I guess this will be over by the time people are listening to this, but I got to hit on CBS HQ. So I don't know, maybe people can't listen to that one, but I'm sure I'll have more next week too after people are listening to this on CBS HQ. Just some little segments breaking down the slate on that night. So I guess look out for that as well.
Most definitely. We'll have this episode will go up as soon as we're done. That way it's fresh for everybody to hear it, we have something to listen to going into the weekend. So thank you, Calvin, for joining us on this episode. We really appreciate you. I'll make sure to leave your Twitter in the description. Also the links to the podcasts. Continue to do great things in this realm of basketball. I'm looking forward to seeing more content of what you're doing. I'm a huge fan of it. Brenden, do you have anything happening in the World Explorers Report?
Not really. I might have a couple of game recaps depending on how much available time I have. But yeah, it's been fun. I put out a couple of game recaps from the first Storm Fever game, and then the Sparks as well. I did one of those games as well. But probably more game recaps and hopefully a couple of pieces down the road.
Awesome. And ladies and gentlemen, you can follow me on Twitter as well. I'll also leave Brendan's Twitter in the description as well. You could also follow me on MarylandSportsBlog.com, where I'll be covering the Washington Mystics this summer. And I'm going to get ready for tonight's game. They played 7, and they're in New York, and I'm looking forward to that. But ladies and gentlemen, be tuned for future episodes. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks again, Calvin. Much appreciated to you. Enjoy. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you on the flip side. See ya.
Thank you for tuning in to Big Nate Sports Talk. If you enjoyed that episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share the next big thing, the next up-and-coming sports journalist, Big Nate Sports Talk. It's on all the time, anytime.
And I want to thank you. All I want to do is say thank you for everything you do.